Even modern medicine would probably not have been able to prevent this death. We can determine the severity of the wounds of the man on the shroud because of the anatomical accuracy of the image. An image so accurate, it can be read by a modern physician.
This is a quarter-size negative of a picture of the shroud, and it appears to be a middle-aged male. If we assume that blood is going to appear white, there are other things that will appear white as well. But if we
As a specialist, Dr. Zalud is used to examining X-rays of acute trauma victims.
There's areas of bleeding diffuse about the scalp, both in the front and in the back. There's areas in the chest, again in the front and in the back, that look as if there's been bleeding. You can see that there's been an injury to the left wrist. I can't see the right wrist because the left hand covers the right wrist, but there appears to be an area of injury to the left wrist with blood on both forearms. The posterior portion of both legs and the buttocks are covered with blood as well. In both ankles, there appears to have been some bleeding as well. It's impossible to say what the cause of death was, although there's multiple areas of injury, any one of which could have been fatal.
The specific wounds are consistent with only one cause of death: crucifixion. In the late 1970s, a group of scientists pressured the church to let them examine the shroud with the latest technology. An agreement was finally reached, and the Shroud of Turin research project, STURP, was on its way to Italy.
STURP was put together primarily with the purpose of examining the shroud to determine how the image was formed. But we had the big problem of never being able to see the thing we were to examine until we got there. It was like an expedition into an unknown part of the jungle. We brought with us a host of technologies, virtually every type of imaging that we had available to us to determine how the image was formed. I thought that I was going to be able to walk into the room, see the shroud unveiled, walk up to it, look closely, see the brush strokes, and go home.
Vern Miller was another of the scientists involved. He also started off with a skeptical attitude.
The first time I had heard about the Shroud of Turin was from Barry Schwartz, which I thought was a fairy tale of some type. But STURP's objective was to find the mechanism that caused the image to appear on a piece of linen cloth, and not to authenticate the cloth as the burial wrapping of Christ. So relieved of that responsibility, we could look at it in a much more objective way.
I didn't know what the shroud was at the time. I'd never heard of it to my knowledge.
STURP member Don Lynn took time off from his regular job as director of JPL's digital imaging program for NASA.
At the time, we were working on the Viking program, which was a soft lander on Mars.
We basically had one day to set up the equipment, get it unpacked, set up, and calibrated. And that night, we were supposed to get the shroud around midnight. And of course, about 11 o'clock, a little early, very unusual, the shroud was brought down the hallway into the room. One of the first experiments that was done on the shroud was to separate the cloth from its backing cloth in a small area, about 4 inches. That allowed us the first look at the backside or the underside of the Shroud of Turin in 400 years, and this image is the precise moment that they took their first peek at the back of the shroud. Then Professor Rigi of the Italian team inserted an endoscopic camera between the two cloths. When I saw that focusing light underneath the number 3 bloodstain, I turned off the room lights, he turned on the focusing light, and we saw for the first time that the bloodstains had actually soaked into the cloth the way blood would, and the image did not.
Right away, a significant discovery. When viewed from the front, both the image and the blood are seen clearly. But when light is shown through the back of the shroud, the blood is visible, but the image is not.
That was something we didn't know until that moment, which meant the image could not be a painting, or we would have a density of paint on the shroud that would show in a transmitted light photograph.
We were all anxious to find if the blood was real or not. When I first viewed the shroud during those tests, the blood did not look real to me. The blood looked quite red and fresh, other than something that was supposedly 2,000 years old. To determine if this was real blood, we took samples on a sticky back tape and then examined it in a laboratory much later. It was not until several months later that we determined that this was real blood. Okay, in the next slide, we show the actual blood on the weave of the cloth.
Is this the blood of Jesus? Is it the blood of another person who happened to have been crucified by the Romans? Is it the blood of an innocent man taken to create an extraordinary hoax?
One of the theories of image formation on the shroud was that it might be a scorch because the color is something like the scorched color of an ironing board cover. In normal light, both scorch and image look the same. Since all scorches fluoresce under ultraviolet light, we imaged the shroud using UV photography. We did not see body image. We got wonderful images of all the scorches on the shroud, but the body image didn't show at all, proving that the body image could not be a scorch.
As to what might have caused the image, the scientists ruled out possibility after possibility.
Microanalysis of the threads that were brought back determined that the color change of the threads was due to a chemical change, dehydrated oxidation. But we do not know what caused that chemical change.
The stains on the cloth are remarkably subtle and complex. One fiber will be discolored, while an adjacent one is not. Yet each fiber is only 1/10 the diameter of a human hair. And in some places, the image only penetrates to 1/500th of an inch. There is no known way of replicating such markings on a cloth. Most experts are now convinced that the image was not painted. In the search to understand how it was created, scientists placed it under a machine called the VP-8 Image Analyzer, a unique device used by NASA to interpret photographs from space.
If we place a perfectly normal young man's picture under the VP,
any two-dimensional image, such as a photograph or a painting, will not be read properly. The shape of the original object will appear distorted.
the hair, which we know to be over the brow, is actually sunken because it's darker, whereas the face, the cheeks, are actually elevated because they're lighter.
A photograph of the shroud should be distorted as well, but it isn't. When this image was seen for the first time, scientists were amazed. It was perhaps as dramatic a moment as when Segundo Pius saw the negative image of the shroud for the first time.
We notice that the nose is above the cheeks and that the face is of the proper dimension. The beard and the hair...
The VP-8 analysis was a breakthrough, establishing that the image was formed while the cloth was draped over a three-dimensional object.